Pigmented FloorCote is probably one of the most beautiful products that we have for floors. Has been around for about 10 years, and we've been slowly making improvements to it to make it easier to apply. You cannot apply this product without the right tools or without skilled applicators. When I mean a skilled applicator, I mean somebody who has been using a trowel and a sponge float for many years. These are the simple basics that you have to have before you start applying pigmented FloorCote. An industrial vacuum cleaner, good industrial drill. Your applicator has to have good clean steel trowel, a sponge float, knee pads so he can protect his knees because you spend a lot of time on your knees. A roller, good clean lambswool roller to apply your primers. Conventional 75mm brush for cutting in around your edges. Spindle for your drill, not a stick. This is the only thing that you can use. It's a spindle. You can either have them made for yourself or you can buy them at any good hardware store which mixes the pigmented FloorCote. As I said, you cannot mix it by hand. You cannot mix it by wooden stick. The only way you can mix this product so you get all the ingredients working is by this kind of spindle drill. You have to have good clean buckets, at least 3 a minimum, because you're bringing in as you require. You can't have one bucket, run out and then go and do the next mix. You must have at least 3 good buckets. You need to have masking tape just in case you have to mask off any skirtings. You don't want to mess the pigmented FloorCote up against plugs or skirting boards, so you have to have a good healthy stock of masking tape. And then the final product, because we lay this in panels of no larger than 16 square meters, and our thickness of the product is 3mm, is a double-sided tape which you can stick to the floor and run your FloorCote, which you'll see later up in the video, up against the sponge, so you can create a grid on the floor. Right, Julian, we're going to go through in a very concise way, step by step, of how we apply this product. We arrive on site and we've got a brand new wood floated cement screed. The first thing that we do is that we clean it, take off any of the little bit of creatstone, paint, etc., but give it a good clean. Once we're happy that the floor is clean and sound, first step.
Well, the first step will be that you've got to apply a layer of floor screed primer onto your newly laid screed.
1 coat of floor screed primer.
Depending on the porosity of your screed.
Okay, so if it's a very, very porous screed, you might want to put 2 on. But generally the rule is we apply 1 screed. Okay. And what the floor screed primer, all it is doing is creating an even suction over the whole floor. If we didn't put this primer down, what you'd find is that the floor, if it was a little bit more porous in one area, would suck the pigments out of the floor and you'd get all this patchy look all over the place. So all this floor screed primer does is creates an even suction on the floor, so when we apply our pigmented FloorCote on top of that, it's a consistent finish it's applying to, not an uneven finish. Okay. The spread rate that we're working on, which we'll go over again when we apply it, is about 8 square meters per liter. Depending on how, if we had a steel floated finish, you might even get 15 squares a liter. But when ordering, we recommend work on 8 squares a liter because certain floors are more porous than others. We're happy that the floor is sound. We have chosen a panel of at least 16 square meters. Industrial vacuum cleaner to make sure that we've got the last bit of dust off the floor before we apply our floor screed primer. Right, you can see we've had a pretty comprehensive vacuum. We're now going to apply 1 coat of floor screed primer. So water-based, liquid, plus minus 8 square meters per liter, applied with a lambswool roller. Jules, it's over to you. We've applied a liberal coat of FloorCote Prime at about 8 square meters per liter. You notice that Julian spent a lot of time making sure that it covered every square inch of this floor, because what we're trying to achieve here is even porosity. We're going to allow this to dry overnight, and tomorrow we're going to apply our pigmented floor coat directly onto the screen. We are now proceeding with stage 2 of laying pigmented floor coat. You saw yesterday we laid the FloorCote primer. It's dried overnight, it's nice and hard. We've now got even porosity. We've measured off an approximate area of 15 square meters. We're going to put our sponge tape on so we can get a nice level to work to of 3 millimeters, which you'll see us move as we go into the actual laying the floor. Just to recap and go through the equipment that we need 2 nice clean buckets to mix our product in, because we don't want to mix, finish, mix again. We want a nice steady flow, as you'll see when we're laying the floor. You'll see we've put the actual 2-part system of the cement, latex, modified plaster, and its pigment in the actual 5-liter bucket on its side, because in the bottom over here is actual the pigment. If it's standing up here the whole time like this, it sinks the bottom and it becomes a problem to mix it. So as soon as you get onto site, lay everything on its side. Once you've worked out how many kits you need for the area, then it's just a matter of shaking it up, pouring it in, and agitating it with the drill. One of the most important things to remember though is, when you've got a decided upon area you're going to use our floor coat, make sure you order sufficient product for the job. Make sure your batch numbers are all the same for the specific job, because if you use different batch numbers, if you suddenly have to order one more kit because you've run out of product, you're going to find that that area is completely different to the rest of the area, even though it's the same color. We make this product job for job, batch for each job. So we're going to now proceed with the application process. It's imperative that you watch closely, because there's a lot of stuff that's going to be going on in the next 30 minutes. So I'm going to hand it over to Julian and to Mohammed. So what we've got now is our 15 square meters of floor primed. We now have to have a cutoff point. We're laying the masking tape on the FloorCote primer first, because if you put the sponge directly onto the FloorCote primer, it's very difficult to get off with. So we always lay a nice strip of masking tape and we put the sponge on top of the masking tape. You can see Julian has followed a line. This would either be a chalk line that you put on the floor, but we've got a nice line here on the floor which we're following. And then Mohammed's coming with his one-sided sponge tape, which is 3 millimeter thick. The flooring product is laid 3 millimeters thick, so they've got a nice gauge to work with over here, and it stops the actual product flowing onto the other side of the floor. So if you were laying this floor in many panels, this would be your first panel. You would be able to work up against that. This would be an open panel, and you'd be doing your next panel, and the next day you'd come back and do the actual insert panels. As I said earlier on, we've laid the actual pigmented color on the actual floor sideways so the pigment can disperse, and now he's giving them each a gentle shake while Mohammed is finishing off putting his double-sided sponge tape on, or single-sided sponge tape on. And that's really all it is. You can see the color has changed to a nice chocolate brown, which is ground pepper, and it's a catalyst system where you mix that with the powder, kit for kit for kit. Okay, what he's doing now is putting the whole container of the pigment, ground pepper, into a clean 25-liter bucket. And make sure that you use everything. You cannot split kits, you use a full kit every time. Even if you've got 1 square meter left over to do, you mix the full kit, and unfortunately you'll have to get rid of the balance. He pours about 2/3 of the product into the can, then gives it a good shake, and the last bit goes in. He then cuts it open with a Stanley knife to get the last little bit out. So what we're implying here is that every single last drop in that bucket must be used for each kit. Otherwise you will get color variation. If you look in there, you'll see there's a bit of sludge which needs to go in there too, which is the pigment. That will be agitated and mixed into the actual powder when you mix with the Festo drill. Okay, what Julian is doing now is those lumps that we saw coming out of the bottom of the container when he cut it open with a Stanley knife, he's going to make sure they're agitated with the Festo drill. Only then will he put the actual powder in, and then we'll start laying. Remember not to pour too fast, nice and slowly. So he's poured it in nice and slowly, not thrown it in, poured it nice and slowly, and now what Julian will do is agitate it to that creamy mixture. Keep a nice clean bucket of water that you can clean your tools. Okay, so we've mixed it now, and remember, we're in very hot, humid conditions here today, but if it's hot and humid, you need to get that stuff onto the floor as fast as possible. The longer it actually sits in the pot, the more it cooks up, but now Julian's going to actually start delivering to Mohammed, who's going to start laying. Remember, it is self-leveling, so it's a matter of helping it along, and we'll come back and polish it once it sets. So you'll notice what Mohammed is doing, he's just helping it along. He's working at approximately 5 square meters per kit, and he's working it into the skirtings. And Julian's just delivering him it consistently, making sure he's never waiting. So we've now on our third kit, which should do us 15 square meters, which is the exact area that we've measured off here. And you can see there's a nice flow all the time. These two guys have been working each other for a long time, so they understand exactly what is needed. But for a perfect scenario, you need 3 people, 1 people mixing and 2 people applying. So what will happen now, we'll allow this floor to sit for about 20 to 30 minutes to stiffen up. You'll see us feel and test all the time to see if it's stiffened up. Once we feel it's ready, we'll get on and we'll start polishing with a sponge float to take all those lines out that you see at the moment. Okay, so what we've done is we've completed the floor now. We're going to leave that there for at least 30 minutes. It's going to stiffen up, then we're going to go back and polish all those fine lines that you can see on there. That's what we want to get, a nice smooth surface, which you do with a sponge float, not with a steel trowel, and you'll watch that process. It's a sponge and then flatten off with a steel trowel. But one thing I want you to notice, if you notice, there was no flurry, there was no urgency, it was just nice and streamlined. Everybody knew what they was doing, and that is a sign of a good team. Also, if you look at your housekeeping, all the bags are kept in one area. They're used for rubbish. So what will happen now, Julian will put all the plastic buckets in there, so you keep your site nice and clean all the time. There's nothing worse than going onto a building site where you just see stuff scattered all over the place. So keep your bags, make sure that you use them for your rubbish at the end of the day. Okay, we've now waited for 30 minutes. It's stiffened up nicely. We're going to start polishing with our sponge floats and finishing off with the steel float. You've noticed they've got nice protective polystyrene placemats for their buckets, for their knees, so we don't create any indentations, and they're barefoot. So they apply water with their block brush, nice clean water, and then they start using their sponge floats to nice flatten off those ridges and get a nice smooth finish. So you can see the application procedure is two of the polishers working hand in hand, coming down nice and evenly, sponge floating, making sure all the lines are flattened, and then polishing with the steel trowel to make it a nice monolithic hard screed. Remember that the biggest panel size we can do is 15 square meters, because if it was any bigger, the product that's behind their feet would start setting off and it'd run away with them, and you wouldn't be able to polish it off to a consistent, smooth finish. Any excess sludge or fat that he's got, he's soaked up with his block brush and he's depositing it into his bucket. Okay, what Julian's doing now is picking up all the excess sludge that he's taken off, or the fat as we call it, and he's putting it into his bucket, so he doesn't trowel it back into the floor. Okay, so Julian's now complete and Mohammed will do the final bit. Right, we've now completed the second stage in pigmented floor coat. Let's recap the most important points. No panel sizes bigger than 15 to 16 square meters. You have to have two polishers. Nice boards to make sure you don't get indentations from your bucket or your feet. Always polish barefoot. Have a good sponge float to take away all the sort of hard edges, and then polish off with a steel float. And then we allow it to dry for at least 48 hours, 2 days, before we start the sealing stage